Well, I'm going to try not to imitate Tim Harden here and hit the Catholic, non-Catholic theme. We have today here Leif Arvidson. He's the executive director of the Blessed Stanley Rother Shrine, which is being built on the south side of Oklahoma City. I just learned that is scheduled to open this coming February. He's a third generation Alaskan fisherman, and he completed his undergraduate degree in history with a minor in theology at Franciscan University of Steubenville, Ohio. And he obtained his law degree from a better known university, a rival of my alma mater, Notre Dame. And from the beginning of their marriage, which has been blessed with 10 children, back to the Catholic theme, Mr. Arvidson and his wife, Karen, have been dedicated to the mission of the church, including 2 years of missionary work in Japan and 10 years of serving at another shrine, the Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe in La Crosse, Wisconsin, before moving to Arkansas. And he's here today to tell us about the Blessed Stanley Rother and the new shrine. Please help me welcome him.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here with you today. As everybody knows, I'm here to talk about the Blessed Stanley Rother Shrine. It's located on 89th and Shields on the south side of Oklahoma City. Have any of you seen it driving by on I-35? Yeah, it's really coming along. We hope to be finished up. Hopefully, we'll be done with the construction part of it in November, and then we'll get staff moved in, get the inventory established in the gift shop and museum set up and everything ready to go. And as Larry said, then we'll be opening up in February. So I'll start with some information about Blessed Stanley. It sounds like you've pretty much heard everything already in the trivia, though. That cuts my talk in half, which is good. But he was a farm kid from Okarche, Oklahoma. And he was the oldest of 4 children who survived infancy in his family. He was a very hard worker and good at working with his hands. In high school, he was the president of the Future Farmers of America Club. His best grades by far were in agricultural classes. So everyone had him pegged to graduate from high school and go on to taking over the family farm. But he surprised everyone when he announced that he felt called to the priesthood, to the ministry, and he wanted to go to seminary. He entered seminary in San Antonio, Texas, and they saw that he was a hard worker, and they gave him a lot of good physical work to do, tending the grounds, but he struggled greatly from the beginning with his studies, because back then in the Catholic Church in the 60s, most everything was done in Latin, and he had never studied Latin before. His grades became so poor that he had to repeat some classes that he didn't pass, and they eventually told him that he just wasn't cut out for seminary studies. The rector of the seminary contacted his bishop up here in Oklahoma and actually told him Stanley lacks the intellectual capacity to continue his studies for the ministry. So he was sent back home. And you can imagine how he felt as a young man. He believed he had a calling, but he was told that he wasn't cut out for it. A religious sister, Sister Clarissa, who had been his 5th grade teacher, saw that he was suffering, and she told him, pray and trust, and God will take care of it. And he did. Stanley's bishop recognized that he had a calling and found another seminary for him out east, Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg, Maryland. And he enrolled there and worked hard and did pretty well. A priest who knew Stanley later explained that the rector of this seminary understood that a certain degree of learning was necessary to be a decent priest, but he also knew that other characteristics like good judgment, stability, integrity, an active faith and prayer life, and zeal for souls were more important than an A in theology. So Stanley made it through seminary and he was ordained in 1963. He served at various parishes in Oklahoma. He served over in Tulsa and in Oklahoma City, and he also served in Durant for some time. Down in Durant, it was by Lake Texoma, and he helped to build a number of retreat houses and cabins on Lake Texoma. So he would work with his hands and do the physical work that he was so good at during the week, and then on weekends he would offer masses. But some people still weren't satisfied with his type of work. Some of the older priests said to him, "Stanley, that's just not priest's work." And one even said that they may have made a mistake in ordaining Stanley. So these types of comments were very hurtful to young Father Rother, but he kept doing the best he could, and he was always cheerful. In 1968, after 5 years of serving in different parishes in Oklahoma, he met a missionary priest who told him about a mission in Guatemala and invited Father Stanley to help with the mission. And Father Stanley prayed a lot about it, and he really felt that he had a calling to be a missionary. He spoke with his bishop, who gave him permission, and not too long later, he packed up his pickup truck and drove 2,500 miles down to Guatemala to serve at a mission in Santiago Atitlan, Guatemala. There was a Mayan tribe there that was called the Tutsujil, and many of the people lived in dire poverty. The average man made about 50 cents a day. Many people lived in huts with dirt floors, and sometimes all they had to eat was grass. They suffered greatly from poverty and malnutrition, and most of the children born when he went down there didn't survive into adulthood. A Catholic parish had been established there in the year 1536, only about 4 decades after Columbus first sailed to the Americas. But before Oklahomans established a mission there in the 1960s, they had been without a priest for almost a century. So Stanley ended up learning the local dialect, which is Tutsujil, and he learned within 2 years how to offer Mass in Tutsujil so the people could understand what was going on at Mass. And he also helped to translate the New Testament into Tutsujil. So with the grace of God, he was actually able to master a new language for the sake of serving his people. And he helped the people in various ways with their physical needs. He helped them experiment with new farming techniques and set up irrigation systems. He physically helped to build a hospital. He wrote about, putting in the conduit and for electrical work, the plumbing, putting in cabinetry and things like that. He helped to establish a school, and he helped with establishing a nutrition program that eventually was very successful. And being a hands-on guy, if somebody's truck broke down, he would go out and fix it for them. He shared meals with his people. This is a picture. Sorry, it's not such a good picture. I had my secretary take that picture out of a book just yesterday. But this is a poor crippled elderly man from the village who joined Father Stanley for lunch at the rectory every day. Otherwise, he didn't have anything to eat. And Father Stanley regularly ate at the homes of parishioners, and he ate whatever they ate. And if they ate grass, he would eat grass with them. And sometimes he knew if he ate with them, he would be sick, but he did it anyway. A fellow priest later wrote and said, Stanley emphasized that everyone had to be respected and treated as children of God, made in the image and likeness of God. So Stanley took care of their spiritual needs and their physical needs. Father Stanley summed up everything in a letter to his sister in 1980 when he commented that the gospel reading of that day meant a lot to him. The gospel reading said, "The poor have the good news preached to them." And that's what he hoped to do. He really loved the people, and they really loved him in return because he respected them, he admired them, and he helped them himself. They sensed his love for them, and they loved him in return. So at the time in Guatemala, the church was heavily persecuted. And many Christians at that time were being kidnapped, tortured, and killed, including priests and catechists who Blessed Stanley knew and trained and worked with there. As just one example, when a catechist, Diego, this is his picture here with his family, he was outside of the church one day. He had been trained by Stanley, and Father Stanley trained a lot of catechists. He wanted them to take the gospel to their people and teach them about the faith. And he was outside of the church one day, and 4 big men tried to grab him and haul him away. He grabbed onto a banister or railing, but as they pulled him, the banister broke, and he was literally screaming for help as they dragged him down the stairs, stuffed him in a car, and took him away. Father Stanley arrived just as they were getting him into the car, and he said that he could hear his muffled screams for help, but he couldn't do anything to help him. He said that he knew that his friend was being taken off to be tortured for 1 or 2 days and then be brutally murdered. And that's exactly what happened. As you can see, Diego was just a young guy. He was 30 years old and had a wife and 2 children, a 3-year-old child and a 1-year-old. And then after seeing all of this, Father Stanley was informed that he had been put on a death list. So they were coming for him next. His bishops in Guatemala and Oklahoma, his parishioners in Guatemala and his family all said, Stanley, you've got to go back to Oklahoma, at least for some time. So he did for a short time. But when he was back here in Oklahoma, he just absolutely felt the need to be with his people. He couldn't be anywhere else. He knew the struggles they were going through. And he said, the shepherd cannot run at the first sign of danger. So he returned to Guatemala, knowing that they would come for him. And he said, if it is my destiny that I should give my life here, then so be it. He also wrote to a friend, he said, pray for us that we may be a sign of the love of Christ for our people, and that our presence among them will fortify them to endure these sufferings in preparation for the coming of the kingdom. He still kept his good humor. He quoted a priest friend who said, I like martyrs, but just to read about them. He started sleeping downstairs in an inconspicuous room, and he would sleep with his shoes on. So if anybody broke into the rectory, then he'd be able to hightail it out of there if he needed to. He knew the stories of people knocking on a door, and when the victim would come to the door, people would grab him, take him out to torture him, and then kill him. And he had seen that pattern too many times. A sister who worked with him remembered that one evening, some people were gathered together in the rectory and the doorbell rang. It was dark outside, and they all wondered if it was someone coming for Father Stanley that night. And you can imagine how Father Stanley felt as he went and answered the door. But he answered it anyway. But luckily that night, it was just a friend. But you can understand the anxiety that everyone felt. But he stayed there still. He stayed for his people. At one of his last masses, he said, brothers, go forward with our shepherd, Jesus Christ, and don't deviate from the faith. In a short time, we will see each other in heaven. Be faithful to God. Remain in the faith of the saints and the apostles. He said, this may be the last mass that I celebrate with you. Not long after that, they came for him. 3 big men entered the rectory, eventually found Father Stanley. He struggled against them, and they shot him twice. So Father Stanley died as a martyr. He gave his life for the faith, and he gave his life for his people. The Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, and that's exactly what he did. His body was brought back to Oklahoma, but as you know now, they kept his heart in Santiago Atitlan. There's an early Christian author by the name of Tertullian who said, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And immediately after his martyrdom, they began to see the fruits of the martyrdom. In approximately 450 years, the area where Father Stanley ministered had no vocations to the priesthood. Since his martyrdom in 1981, 11 priests from the area have been ordained, and 5 are currently in seminary. And Blessed Stanley's martyrdom is the impetus behind the building of this shrine in Oklahoma City. The shrine will be a place of pilgrimage. meaning that people will travel from all over the states and hopefully from all over the world to visit the site, to pray, and to rededicate their lives to God. A pilgrimage is a spiritual journey where you set aside time to travel to a holy place to pray. And we anticipate that tens of thousands of people will visit the shrine to pray every year. We will have a breathtaking Spanish colonial church in the Baroque style of architecture. Baroque style typically incorporates a magnificent dome with light emanating in from the outside and a lot of other beautiful features. We'll have beautiful works of art and hope to have beautiful liturgies and sacred music. And we'll offer a mass and confession every day so pilgrims can receive forgiveness of their sins and receive grace and strength to live the Christian life. Shrines are a place of mercy and of conversion. The church will hold approximately 1,800 people. It will be the largest Catholic church in the state of Oklahoma. 650 tons of steel was used for the church frame. There's a project manager from Bolt Companies who was talking to me one day, and he said he's built a lot of big public buildings with big storm shelters. But he said, if there's ever a tornado coming through this area, I'm going to the shrine, because he's never seen so much steel in a building before. We'll have a pipe organ with 3,600 pipes. Some of the pipes will be quite large, as you can imagine, for a church that size. Some of them will be as small as an eraser on the end of a pencil. And Blessed Stanley's body will be laid to rest in a beautiful little chapel within the church. The shrine will have what's called we're calling a pilgrim center, where pilgrims will be greeted and oriented to the shrine. The Pilgrim Center will have a gift shop and a video room where videos about Blessed Stanley's life will be played. And a museum is being built to tell the story of Blessed Stanley's life and his ministry and his martyrdom. In the museum, the first section will highlight Father Stanley's days as a child on the farm. Then you'll move through to a section that will have information about his seminary days, especially out in Maryland. Then some information and artifacts from the beginning of his priesthood. And then they'll have a section where people can learn about Guatemalan culture, the food they eat, the clothing they wear, the songs they sing, and so forth. And then we'll have information about the mission and ministry of Blessed Stanley, the persecution of the church there, and finally his martyrdom, and then some of the fruits of his martyrdom. And at the shrine, we will serve the growing Hispanic community in the south side of Oklahoma City. How many of you have been by the shrine site and noticed that we built a big hill there in the middle of the site? Yeah. I'll give you some background on that. In the Bible, there are various instances where angels appear to people. The angel Gabriel's appearance to the Virgin Mary is probably the most well-known example. Sometimes people even appeared, as Moses and Elijah appeared at Jesus's transfiguration. Or in the book of Acts, where it says that Paul had a vision of a man from Macedonia asking him to come to Macedonia. Since the biblical times, different visions and apparitions have occurred also. For example, St. Patrick saw a vision of an Irishman and heard the Irish people asking him to go there, so he traveled to Ireland as a missionary. An outstanding apparition occurred in the year 1531. In December of 1531, the Virgin Mary appeared to a Native American in what is now Mexico City. And she appeared to him on a hill called Tepeyac Hill. The Native American's name was Cuauhtlatoatzin, but luckily for our sake, he took a Christian name, Juan Diego. Juan Diego said that as he was walking along, everything became surreal, bright and beautiful. And he heard the birds chirping. He saw beaded dewdrops on the leaves and the grasses. He thought he was actually in heaven. And a beautiful lady appeared, the Virgin Mary, Jesus's mother. And in speaking about God to him, she said, "I want very much to have a sacred little house built here in which I will show him and exalt him and manifest him to these people. And she sent Juan Diego to the bishop to ask that the church be built. And the bishop had a healthy skepticism, and he asked for a sign that Jesus's mother was really appearing to him and asking for a church to be built. Juan Diego later told Our Lady, he said, "I don't think the bishop believes me. Why don't you send someone more important than me to convince him?" And she said, "No, I've chosen you." And she told Juan Diego to go to the top of that hill where he would find an assortment of flowers. It was the middle of winter. It was December. But he faithfully went to the top of the hill where he found an assortment of beautiful flowers. And he walked back down the hill with the flowers, and Our Lady physically arranged the flowers in his cloak or tilma that he was wearing. And then she sent him off to the bishop. When Juan Diego opened his tilma for the bishop to show him the flowers that were in the cloak or tilma, there was this beautiful painting of the Virgin Mary on the tilma. I'm sure that you've seen copies of it. I've seen it twice in Mexico City. The tilma was made of cactus fiber, and it should have disintegrated within 25 years, but it's still there today. And this apparition occurred in 1531, so it's almost 400 years later. So the bishop was convinced that the mother of Jesus was appearing to Juan Diego, and he built a church next to the hill, Tepeyac Hill. And Juan Diego moved closer to the church, and day after day, he would tell pilgrims and people who came to see the miracles, he would tell them about Our Lady and her message and how she wanted the church built there for them. Within 1 decade after the Virgin Mary appeared there, 9 million Native Americans embraced the Christian faith. It was the greatest mass evangelization in the history of Christianity. And the faith quickly spread to the shores of Lake Atitlan, Guatemala, where a parish was established in Santiago Atitlan in 1536, only 5 years after this extraordinary event occurred. Fast forwarding to modern times, more than 4 centuries later, Oklahoma's own native son, Father Stanley Rother, became rector of that church in Santiago Atitlan and ministered to thousands of souls. So, long story short, at the shrine in Oklahoma City, we have a little hill, Tepeyac Hill. It's close to 50 feet tall, and we think it will be very inspiring to Hispanic pilgrims who remember that beautiful story. So I just wanted to give you a window into the life of Blessed Stanley and our plans at the Blessed Stanley Rother Shrine. I hope you will see in him a model of humility. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't a great intellectual. He had his limitations, but he did the best he could do with the gifts that he was given. And I hope you find in his story an inspiration to commit yourselves to what you are called to do. Blessed Stanley knew that what God was calling him to do, and with God's grace, he did it. He never gave up. You're probably not called to be a priest, but you're maybe called to be a father or a mother, a husband or a wife. And whatever it is, live your vocation to the fullest. And I hope you will also see in Father Stanley an example of service to follow. In speaking of himself, Jesus said, "The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Blessed Stanley followed in Jesus' footsteps and offered his life in service to others and in service to God. May we be inspired to do the same. The Shrine Church, as we mentioned earlier, will be dedicated in February, and I hope you'll all come and visit us soon. Thank you very much for your time. Yeah. I'm happy to take a few questions.
Were the people that killed him, was it a political death, or were they drug dealers? The people who would come to the door and take the men out and torture them and murder them?
Yeah,
What was the reason?
It was political, but not because he was political, just because there was a terrible political climate in Guatemala at that time. They say Blessed Stanley, he was just a guy from Oklahoma, you know, good old Oklahoma. I mean, he was more apolitical than anything else. He was there to serve the poor people and to proclaim the gospel. But it was political reasons. Yes.
Just being a saint sounds very complicated going through all these steps. One of the things that it talks about is a miracle being required or documented. Is there a specific miracle that they said this would be it, or is it just the serving of
Mhm.
the church in Guatemala? Is that
Yeah, so right now, Father Stanley is known as a blessed. We had the beatification ceremony back in 2017. Was anybody able to attend that? Okay, beautiful ceremony. It was so surprising there because the Catholic population in Oklahoma is so small. They didn't know how many people would even make it there, but it turned out that they were thinking maybe 10,000 might make it. They ended up with 20,000 and they had to turn people away at the doors. And that was when the Archbishop said, wow, there's something to this. And he thought maybe we should be building a shrine where people can learn about Blessed Stanley and come to pray. But there are two major steps to being recognized as a saint in the Catholic Church. And the first is just being beatified, which Father Stanley has made it to that point. Usually you need a miracle associated with your prayers in order to be beatified. So that means that in the Catholic tradition, we believe that, there's the church in heaven and the church on earth, and we're not completely separated. We believe that holy people who are with our Lord in heaven can pray for us here on earth, just how you would ask your friend or your mother or someone to pray for you. So the church says that if someone prays and asks Father Stanley to pray for them and they receive a miracle, for example, they have cancer and there's no medical explanation, but they are cured within a short time after with no other reason why. It'll go before a medical panel and doctors here and then go over to the Vatican. And if it's proven that there's no medical physical reason why this should have happened, then they'll say, okay, it was a miracle. And once that's documented, you go to the stage of beatification. You're known as a blessed. That didn't have to happen with Father Stanley because of his martyrdom. If you give your life for the faith, then you can automatically go up to that stage. And so Pope Francis declared him a martyr in December of 2016, and then he was able to be recognized as a blessed. To be a saint, there would need to be a miracle that occurs. And different people have submitted different miraculous grace-filled events that have happened in their lives when they've said, Blessed Father Stanley, please pray for me, for my child who's sick or something like that. And those are being looked at and considered by the Archdiocese. And if there was anything substantial enough, then that would be sent to the Vatican for consideration. He's not a saint yet. Yeah, we're very careful about a lot of, at the shrine I worked at in Wisconsin, there was a Native American young lady who was recognized as a blessed. Her name is Kateri Tekakwitha. And we made a big $2,000 plaque by a statue of her that said, Blessed Kateri Tekakwitha. Within a few months, she was recognized as a saint. So we're trying to be a little bit careful, and not put blessed on everything, because one day we hope that we'll have a saint from Oklahoma.
I've got one question. So you'd said that the people removed his heart and kept his heart in Guatemala, and then his body was brought back here. I'm curious as to, is that based on doctrine? Is that just something they wanted to do down there, keep his heart in Guatemala because they were so close to him? And where did they entomb him here in Oklahoma?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, the people there, they thought it was very appropriate because he loved them so much and they loved him so much. They took that as a symbol of that love, I think, and they requested. They wanted him to remain there, and his family was like, no, we want him up here in Oklahoma. And so that's the agreement they came to. They were allowed to keep his heart, but for no particular other reason that I know of. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, he is at Resurrection Cemetery in Oklahoma City. So that heart is known as a relic. Another Catholic thing. I'm sorry, I know you're not Catholic. I just thought I'll tell you our story though. Anyway.
That's okay. Tell us.
Sure. So you may have heard of relics of different saints. In the book of Acts in chapter 19, it says, so magnificent were the mighty works of God that were done through the hands of St. Paul, that people would touch cloths and aprons to St. Paul, and then they would touch them to sick people or people who were possessed, and they would be cured. Somehow through a cloth that was touched to this holy person, this saint. God worked his grace through that. Or there's the example of Jesus's tassel. The woman who was hemorrhaging touched just Jesus's tassel, and she was cured of her hemorrhaging. Or in the Old Testament, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the prophet Elisha passed away and was buried in a cave. And many years later, another person passed away, and they hurriedly put this dead person in the cave. He touched the prophet Elisha's bones, and he came back to life. So even in biblical times, they have this idea of relics. So in the Catholic churches, they will have shrines to honor always our Lord, but they will remember different saints, like we're remembering Blessed Stanley at this shrine in Oklahoma City. Sometimes they'll have a tooth of a saint or a lock of hair or something like that that's a relic of the saint. So here we have the whole body, which is really unique, especially for the United States and Oklahoma.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Arvidson.